Rain hammered the roof of Mile 17 Diner, the last lit building on a stretch of Detroit highway that most people only passed through, never stopped at. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed over a counter worn smooth by decades of tired hands. Sofia Lane carried a tray of coffee cups across the diner floor. One hand pressed instinctively against the curve of her 6-month belly. The other stayed steady, even with the ache in her back. She had been on her feet since midnight. Before sunrise, the woman they called useless would become the only reason a child was still alive. Sofia was 27 years old, a widow, and the only waitress willing to take the graveyard shift at a diner most people forgot existed. She knew every groove in the counter, every sticking door hinge, every flickering bulb. Her husband had installed half of them himself. Noah Lane had spent 6 years as Mile 17's maintenance man. He was the kind of quiet, careful worker who noticed things other people walked past 1,000 times without seeing. He used to say a building could tell you everything, if you were willing to listen to the small sounds instead of just the big ones. Sofia had loved him for exactly that, for the way he paid attention, for the way he made her feel like the most seen woman in any room he stood in. 7 months ago, that attention had gone into the ground with him, buried under a report that called his death an accident, and called Sofia quietly, a woman who should have known better than to trust a man who worked with gas lines for a living. She had carried that shame for months, the way you carry something you know is wrong, but have no proof to fight it with. Tonight, she still had no proof. Only a job, an aching back, and a baby who kicked hardest whenever the diner filled with strangers. "Useless widow," Doug Malloy muttered from behind the register, not bothering to lower his voice. "Even carrying plates is too much for you now." Sofia said nothing. She had learned over 7 long months that arguing with Doug cost more than it was worth. She needed this job. She needed every shift she could get before the baby came. So she swallowed the insult the way she swallowed most things now. Quietly and alone. The bell above the door rang, sharp against the sound of the storm. A man stepped inside, tall, soaked to the bone. He moved with the careful stillness of someone used to watching every exit in a room before he chose where to stand. A small boy clung to his hand, shivering, clutching a little red toy car against his chest like it was the only warm thing left in the world. Matteo Grayson had not chosen Mile 17 because it felt safe. 3 hours earlier, he had been the most feared man in Detroit, a name spoken carefully in rooms where men rarely spoke carefully about anything. Now he was a father running through rain with a 4-year-old boy, betrayed by the one man he had trusted enough to call brother. His car had died 3 miles back. Enzo, his last loyal driver, had been separated from them in the chaos of the storm. And Leo, his 4-year-old son, was turning blue at the fingertips from the cold. Nolan Creed, his own underboss, had once told him Mile 17 was a dead route, closed, forgotten. Nobody would think to look for the Grayson heir at a diner nobody remembered existed. That was supposed to make it safe. It was about to make it exactly the opposite. Sofia noticed the boy first, the way small, careful hands always notice frightened children. He was trying not to cry. He was failing. Something in her chest tightened. The old ache of motherhood arriving before her own child had even taken a breath. She crossed the room without thinking, crouched as low as her belly allowed, and offered the boy a paper napkin folded into the shape of a bird. Leo's eyes went wide. For a moment, the fear in them dimmed. That was the moment the door burst open again. Two men in wet coats stepped inside, and the temperature of the room changed the way it does right before something breaks. "Where is the boy?" one of them said, voice flat, scanning every face in the diner. Doug froze behind the register. The other customers went still. Sofia's mind moved faster than her fear. She looked at Leo. She looked at the counter. She looked at the gap beneath it, just wide enough for a small, trembling child to disappear into. There was only one way to buy him time. She let the tray slip from her fingers. Coffee cups shattered against the tile, sound exploding through the diner, loud enough to turn every head in the room. "Useless," Doug spat, already moving toward her, already certain of exactly what kind of woman she was. He had no idea what she had just done. In the half-second of chaos, Sofia's other hand closed around Leo's wrist. She pulled him down behind the counter, tucking him behind a stack of clean linens where the shadows sat thickest. "Stay small," she whispered. "Stay quiet. I've got you." Leo pressed himself into the linens, red toy car clutched to his chest, and obeyed. Beneath the counter, the world shrank to the sound of his own breathing and the cold metal shelf pressing against his back. He had been frightened for days, but never like this. Sofia rose on shaking legs. One hand pressed to the small of her back. She stood in front of the counter, like it was the only wall left, standing between a child and the men hunting him. She let her voice tremble. She let her hands shake. She let them believe exactly what they already thought of her, that she was fragile, harmless, not worth a second look. It was the only weapon she had left. One of the gunmen moved closer, eyes sweeping the counter, close enough now that Leo could hear his boots against the tile. Under the counter, Leo held his breath the way children do when the world has taught them silence is survival. Sofia laid her palm flat against her belly and kept her voice unsteady, drawing the man's attention toward her fear instead of the shadows behind her. Then her eyes caught something on the doorframe of the kitchen, a small pencil star, faint and half-worn, drawn years ago near a hinge. Noah's mark. Her husband had drawn stars like that on every door and exit in this building, back when he still worked here, fixing what no one else noticed was broken. "If fire ever comes," he used to tell her, "follow the cold wall." Sofia's hand moved before her mind caught up to it, reaching beneath the counter to the old emergency alarm Noah had rewired himself 2 years ago. She pulled it. The fire alarm tore through the diner, lights strobing red. A piercing electronic scream sent customers scrambling for the door and shattered whatever formation the gunman had held. In the chaos, Matteo grabbed Sofia's arm and pulled her and Leo toward the kitchen. Doug lunged to stop them, more afraid of a damaged diner than a dying child. "Move," Sofia said, voice suddenly steel, "or that child dies on your floor." For once, Doug Malloy had nothing to say. Sofia led them past the walk-in coolers to a door disguised as a supply closet. A door only she and one dead man had ever known led anywhere at all. Leo reached for her hand instead of his father's, small fingers locking around hers, the way a child reaches for whoever proved in the worst moment that they would not let go. Beyond the door, stone steps dropped into darkness, into a tunnel Noah had once repaired and never told anyone about except his wife. They disappeared into it, just as the gunmen forced their way into the kitchen behind them. The tunnel smelled of rust and old rain, walls damp with years of forgotten maintenance work. Sofia moved through the dark like she had walked it 100 times. In a way, she had. In every story Noah once told her about this place, in every drawing he'd sketched on the back of receipts, they emerged, breathless, into the ruined lobby of an abandoned motel that once shared its foundation with the diner above. Matteo set Leo down gently and turned to Sofia, chest heaving. His eyes studied her like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to find in a diner off a forgotten exit. He told her briefly what he owed no stranger an explanation for. That Nolan Creed, his underboss of 10 years, the man who had once pulled him out of a burning car, had turned on him that same night. Nolan had wanted him dead before dawn. He had not expected Matteo to still be breathing, let alone standing in a motel lobby he'd been assured no longer existed on any map worth checking. "Who are you?" he said quietly. "That a place like this saved my son's life." Sofia didn't answer right away. She was still catching her breath, one hand pressed to her belly, the other still tangled in Leo's small fingers. "My husband built this tunnel," she finally said. "He never got to tell anyone why he thought we'd need it." Matteo's expression shifted, some old caution rearranging itself into something closer to attention. "Who was your husband?" "Noah Lane," Sofia said. "He worked maintenance here. He died 7 months ago. They called it a gas accident." Something in Matteo's jaw tightened at the word accident, the way a man's face changes when a coincidence stops feeling like one. "Nolan Creed told me this route was dead," he said slowly. "Closed. Abandoned. No one would think to bring a target here." Sofia felt the floor tilt beneath her, though she hadn't moved. "Noah died here," she said. "In this motel 7 months ago." Rain leaked through a hole in the motel ceiling, dripping steadily onto rotted carpet, the only sound in the silence that followed. Matteo looked at the tunnel behind them, then at Sofia, then at his son's small hand still wrapped around a stranger's fingers. "I don't believe in accidents anymore," he said quietly. "Not after tonight." Sofia pressed her palm flat against a wall to keep herself steady, exhaustion and grief and adrenaline all fighting for space behind her eyes. There, faint against the peeling paint of the doorframe, was another star, small, pencil, Noah's hand. She touched it the way you touch something you thought you'd lost forever. "He always checked things 3 times, she whispered. "The stove, the locks, the gas line. He never left anything half-finished." She remembered standing in their small kitchen the morning of the accident, watching him check the pilot light on their own stove out of habit before he'd even had his coffee. He used to laugh at himself for it, called it his one useless superstition. It hadn't been useless. It had been the last true thing anyone ever noticed about him. "A careless man," Matteo said. "Doesn't leave a map for the people he loves." Sofia looked up at him, something fierce breaking through her exhaustion. "Then help me prove he wasn't careless," she said. "Because everyone in that diner believes my husband killed himself by accident. And I have spent 7 months being the widow who couldn't even carry a tray without dropping it." Headlights swept briefly across the motel's broken windows. Enzo, finally catching up, engine idling low outside the ruined lobby. Matteo studied the tunnel one last time, understanding settling over his face like a weight he hadn't wanted to carry. This route, this diner, this motel. Nolan had called it dead for a reason. It hadn't been abandoned. It had been repurposed, quietly, off the books, for shipments no Grayson ledger had ever recorded, and Noah Lane had found out. "Get in the car," Matteo said to Sofia, voice low. "You're not safe here. Neither is he." Sofia looked down at Leo, still holding her hand, refusing to let go even as Matteo reached for him. "I didn't hide your son because you were a king," she said quietly. "I hid him because he was a child shaking under a counter." Something in Matteo's chest, some old certainty about what men like him deserved and didn't, cracked just slightly. he said nothing. He simply nodded and helped her into the car. The safe house sat behind iron gates on the quiet edge of the city, guarded, silent, and entirely unfamiliar to a woman who had learned to survive without anyone's protection at all. A doctor was already waiting when they arrived, along with 2 guards who watched Sofia the way men watch something valuable they don't yet trust. Sofia sat stiffly on the edge of an unfamiliar bed, one hand on her belly. She felt the strange, hollow fear of having traded one kind of danger for another she didn't understand yet. Matteo appeared in the doorway. An hour later, calmer now, though something behind his eyes hadn't settled at all. "You'll have everything you need here," he said. "A doctor, protection, anything for the baby." "I hid your son," Sofia said, "because he was a child, not because you were a king." Matteo studied her for a long moment, the way a man studies a sentence that has just rearranged something inside him. "Then what do you need?" he asked quietly. "That I can actually give you." Sofia thought about it, exhaustion pulling at every word. "A phone," she said. "For Rosa. She's the only person left who knew my husband the way I did." Matteo nodded. By morning, Sofia had a phone, a locked door she controlled from the inside, and the quiet, unfamiliar permission to leave whenever the danger passed. It wasn't freedom, but it wasn't a cage either. That first night, Sofia lay awake, staring at an unfamiliar ceiling, one hand on her belly. She listened to the unfamiliar quiet of a house, with armed men standing outside every door. She thought of Doug's voice, calling her useless. She thought of Noah's voice, promising the red book would explain everything. She thought of Leo, asleep down the hall, finally warm, finally safe, because a widow who could barely carry a tray had refused to let him go. For the first time in 7 months, she let herself believe that being underestimated might be its own kind of armor. Rosabelle answered on the second ring, voice cracking with relief at the sound of Sofia's own. "Doug's been tearing apart that kitchen," Rosa said, "looking for something. I think he knows about Noah's red book." Sofia's breath caught. "The maintenance book," she whispered. "Noah kept it behind the industrial fridge. He told me once, if anything ever happened to him, don't trust the accident report. Trust the red book." She hadn't understood what he meant, not until now. Matteo listened from the doorway, arms crossed, something sharpening behind his eyes. His own men had already traced shipments through Mile 17's supply logs. Deliveries with no Grayson approval, no manifest, no explanation except one recurring signature buried in the paperwork. Creed. "Then clear his name," Sofia said, turning to face him fully for the first time since they'd arrived, "before you ever call yourself my protector." Matteo didn't answer with words. He answered by picking up his own phone and calling Enzo. 2 nights later, Sofia insisted on going back. "I'm not asking your permission," she told Matteo, hand braced against the doorframe. Her jaw was set the way it used to be, before grief had worn her down to almost nothing. "I'm telling you where I'm going," Matteo argued. Sofia did not move an inch. She had spent 7 months being pushed around by men with louder voices. She was done moving. In the end, he sent Enzo with her and made her promise to call the moment she was back in the car. What neither of them knew was that Leo had slipped into the back of Enzo's car before they left, small and silent. The red toy car clutched against his chest. He was small enough to hide beneath the blanket Enzo kept in the back seat, and quiet enough that fear made him invisible. He hadn't wanted to be left behind. He'd wanted more than anything to give Sofia the one thing he owned that made him brave. "So she won't be scared," he would say later, as if that explained everything a 4-year-old needed it to. The diner was dark and locked. When Sofia let herself in through the back, Enzo waiting outside with the engine running. She moved past the counter, where Doug had called her useless 100 times. Past the booth, where Leo had first reached for her hand, toward the industrial fridge at the back of the kitchen. Her fingers found the narrow gap behind it, and there, wrapped in an old rag, exactly where her husband had promised, was the red book. Noah's handwriting filled every page, dates, license plates, delivery times that didn't match any shipment schedule she recognized. And there, near the last entries, in ink pressed hard enough to tear the paper slightly, Creed shipments, not Grayson approved. Sofia pressed the book to her chest and allowed herself for one moment to cry. Not from fear, but from the strange, aching relief of finally holding proof that her husband had not been careless. He had been right. That was when the kitchen door opened behind her, and Nolan Creed stepped through it like a man who had been waiting for this exact moment for months. "Looking for something?" he asked, calm as a closed door. Sofia's hand tightened around the red book, every instinct in her body screaming at once. "You knew he'd hidden it here," she said. "That's why you kept coming back." Nolan smiled, and it was worse than any threat he could have spoken aloud. "Your husband," he said, "should have minded his own maintenance schedule." Outside, one of Nolan's men returned from checking the car, dragging a small, terrified boy by the wrist. Sofia's heart stopped. "Found this one hiding in the back seat," the man said, clutching a toy car like it was going to save him. Nolan's smile widened. "Well," he said, "now I don't need to hunt for the heir at all. You brought him straight to me." Sofia's fear for herself disappeared entirely, replaced by something colder and far more dangerous. The fury of a mother watching a child she had already sworn to protect being dragged across a floor. "You're just a pregnant waitress," Nolan said, stepping closer. "With a dead, drunk husband." Something in Sofia broke open, sharp and clear. "My husband was not drunk," she said, voice shaking with rage instead of fear now. "And I am not useless." Sofia's mind raced through every option and found only one that didn't end with Leo hurt. Nolan reached for the red book. Sofia let him take it. But not before her fingers found the last page, tore it free in one motion, and slid it into the only place she trusted more than her own pocket. She tucked it inside Leo's little red toy car, pressing the wheels back into place before anyone noticed. "Move," Nolan ordered, gesturing toward the hidden door behind the industrial fridge. The same tunnel Noah had built, now being used to drag his wife and a stolen heir toward the same motel where he had died. Sofia held Leo's hand through the darkness, promising him in a whisper that she wasn't going to let go, no matter what happened next. At the mouth of the tunnel, just before they were pushed through, Sofia pressed the little red car into a crack in the wall. A small, deliberate trail, left exactly where someone who knew this tunnel, the way Noah had, would eventually think to look. If Matteo followed the signs the way she hoped he would find more than his son. He would find the truth. Enzo found the abandoned car within the hour, engine still warm, back door open, and no sign of Sofia or Leo anywhere in sight. Matteo's calm shattered the moment. Enzo's voice cracked through the phone. By the time he reached the diner, Doug was cowering behind his own counter. The back door to the kitchen stood wide open, leading down into darkness. Matteo didn't hesitate. He went in after them, flashlight cutting through decades of dust, following a tunnel his own organization had unknowingly funded for years. Halfway through, wedged into a crack in the stone, he found it, a small red toy car, wheels slightly askew. as if someone had pressed it back together in a hurry. Inside, folded small enough to fit beneath the plastic frame, was a single torn page. Matteo's hands were not steady as he read it. He reached the motel minutes later, Enzo close behind him, both of them moving through the ruined lobby toward the sound of a voice he recognized far too well. "With Matteo dead," Nolan was saying, "and the heir under my protection, every captain in this city kneels to me instead." Matteo stepped into the doorway, torn page in hand, and for the first time in 10 years of trusted partnership, Nolan Creed's composure slipped. "You needed him alive," Matteo said quietly. "Not because you're loyal, because a dead heir makes you nothing but a murderer. A living one makes you a protector everyone has to obey." Nolan's jaw tightened, the mask finally beginning to crack. "I built half of what you have," he said. "And you'd throw it away for a maintenance man's ledger?" "No," Matteo said. "I'd throw it away for the truth." He held up the torn page, ink smudged but legible, the same handwriting Sofia had shown him days before. Creed shipments. Not Grayson approved. It matched, line for line, the ledger his own men had already traced. "Noah Lane found this route months before you ever thought to hide behind it," Matteo said. "He wasn't a maintenance man to you. He was a witness." Nolan's eyes flicked toward Sofia, something cold and calculating, still working behind them even now. "He was going to talk," Nolan said. "I only did what any of us would have done to protect this family." "You didn't protect this family," Matteo said. "You protected yourself, and you buried an innocent man to do it." Sofia stood near the wall, Leo pressed against her side, watching the man who had once terrified an entire diner finally run out of places to hide. Nolan gave another order. No one moved. The men who had followed him into that motel looked at the red book, then at the torn page in Matteo's hand. That was the moment Nolan understood. Power had already left him. It had crossed the room and stood behind the truth. There was no need to describe in detail what happened next. Only that it ended with Nolan Creed disarmed, exposed, and dragged out of the motel by men who no longer had any reason to believe his version of events. Matteo crossed the room and knelt in front of Leo first, checking his son's face, his hands, the exhaustion in his small, trembling shoulders. Then he looked up at Sofia, and for the first time since the diner, something in his expression wasn't calculation or control. It was gratitude. "You did this," he said. "Not me, you." Sofia sank against the wall, one hand on her belly, the other still holding tight to Leo's fingers, and let herself finally fully breathe. 3 days later, Matteo brought Doug Malloy back to the diner where all of it had started. The counter looked the same as it always had. Same cracked tile, same buzzing lights. But something in the room had shifted the moment Matteo set the red maintenance book down on top of it. "You knew Noah wasn't careless," Sofia said, standing exactly where Doug had once called her useless 100 times, "didn't you?" Doug's hands shook against the counter he had hidden behind for 7 months. "They paid me to stay quiet about the cameras," he finally admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know they'd kill him. I swear I didn't know that." "You only saw the tray fall," Sofia said. "Noah taught me to watch what everyone else missed." Doug swallowed. "She wasn't useless," he said. The words scraped out of him like they hurt. "She was the only one who did something." Rosa stood beside Sofia, arms crossed, watching a man who had spent years enjoying his small share of power finally understand how little of it he had ever truly held. "You don't get to call her useless anymore," Rosa said quietly. "Not in this diner. Not ever again." Doug nodded, and for once he didn't argue. The accident report on Noah Lane was reopened within the week. The word careless was struck from every page that had ever used it against him. In its place, a new record stood, a maintenance worker who had discovered a hidden trafficking route running beneath the diner and motel he'd spent years repairing. A man who had died trying to protect the people he loved from what he'd found. Matteo stood beside Sofia at Noah's grave on a quiet, gray morning. Rain finally softened into mist. "Your husband saved my son," he said, "before I ever knew his name." Sofia didn't cry because she was weak. She cried because, for the first time in 7 months, someone had finally said the truth about Noah, out loud, in daylight, without flinching. She knelt and pressed her palm flat against the cold headstone, the same way she used to press it against a door frame marked with a small pencil star. "You can stop watching over us now," she whispered. "I found the rest of the way myself." Matteo stood a respectful distance behind her, hands in his pockets, letting the silence belong to her alone. Weeks passed. Sofia went into labor on an ordinary afternoon, and Matteo drove her to the hospital himself, hands steadier than either of them expected. Leo sat outside the delivery room, clutching his red toy car, swinging his legs against the plastic chair, asking anyone who would listen the same question. "Can the baby call me brother?" No one had the heart to tell him it would be complicated. So they simply told him yes. Sofia gave birth to a healthy baby girl and named her Hope Lane, not Grayson, never Grayson. Some names are meant to honor the man who came before, not the man standing in the doorway now. Matteo didn't argue. He understood, finally, that respect sometimes means stepping back instead of stepping in. He bought the diner outright not long after, quietly, without putting his name on the paperwork at all. He handed the keys to Sofia instead. "It was never mine to run," he told her. "It was always yours. You just didn't know it yet." Sofia turned Mile 17 Diner into something it had never been allowed to be before. A shelter, quiet and unmarked, for pregnant women, widows, and children running from men just like the ones who had once hunted her and Leo through its own kitchen. The corner booth where Leo had first hidden beneath the counter became known, among the handful of people who understood its history, simply as the safe seat. Leo grew a little taller every month, and every month he set his red toy car beside Baby Hope's crib without anyone ever asking him to. Matteo visited often, careful never to overstay his welcome, never to act like a man who owned what he had only ever been allowed to protect. Some evenings, he sat across from Sofia in a booth long after closing, saying very little, simply grateful to exist quietly in a life he had once believed was only built for violence. On the counter, in a small frame Rosa had bought her as a gift, Sofia kept the torn page from Noah's red book, a reminder that her husband had died telling the truth, and that the truth, eventually, always finds its way home. Women arrived some nights the same way Sofia once had, soaked, frightened, certain they had nowhere left to go. They found the door unlocked, a bowl of soup waiting, and a woman behind the counter who never once asked them to explain themselves before offering help. Sofia never told them who Matteo was. She only told them the diner was safe, and for the first time in a long time, she believed it completely. They called Sofia Lane useless, because all they ever saw was a tray hitting the floor. They never saw the child hidden beneath the counter. They never saw the truth hidden beneath the diner. And they never saw the widow, trembling and exhausted, strong enough all along to save 2 families with nothing but her own 2 shaking hands. If Sofia's story moved you, like this video and subscribe, and tell us in the comments. Was it the tray, the tunnel, or the truth that broke your heart the most? Every comment helps us keep telling stories about the women the world called weak, right up until the moment they proved everyone wrong.